Imagine for a moment the last time you walked away from a conversation feeling like you left something on the table. Maybe it was a salary negotiation where you accepted the first number they threw at you. Maybe it was a freelance contract where you said yes before you even finished reading the terms. Maybe it was something smaller, a disagreement with a partner, a conflict with a colleague, a deal you almost made but didn't, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice whispered, "I could have handled that better." That voice is not self-doubt. That voice is intelligence trying to wake you up. And if you've picked up this audiobook, some part of you is finally ready to listen. Here's the truth that most people spend decades learning the hard way. Negotiation is not a skill reserved for lawyers in boardrooms or diplomats in foreign capitals. It is the single most consequential social ability a human being can possess. Every relationship you have, every dollar you earn, every opportunity you seize or miss, all of it flows through the invisible architecture of negotiation. The person who understands this doesn't just get better deals, they get a different life. And the person who doesn't, they spend years working twice as hard for half the reward, wondering why the same opportunities seem to keep landing in someone else's lap. What you're about to hear is not a summary of negotiation theory. It's not a list of tactics you'll forget by tomorrow. This is a deep excavation of the 7 secrets that separate people who consistently get what they want from people who consistently settle for what they're given. These secrets are hiding in plain sight in behavioral psychology research, in the stories of elite negotiators, in the patterns of the most successful entrepreneurs, freelancers, and leaders of the modern economy. And by the time you finish listening, you will never enter another negotiation the same way again. Let's begin with the secret that changes everything, the one that, once understood, reframes your entire understanding of what negotiation actually is. The first secret: negotiation begins before you open your mouth. Most people think negotiation starts when someone makes an offer. They're wrong. By the time an offer hits the table, the negotiation is already half over. What happens before that moment? The preparation, the positioning. The psychological groundwork determines the outcome more than any tactic you deploy in the room. Think about how elite athletes approach competition. A sprinter doesn't decide how to run the race while standing in the starting blocks. The race is decided in the months of training, in the mental rehearsal, in the nutrition and sleep and obsessive study of what works. The starting gun is almost a formality. The same principle applies to every negotiation you will ever enter. Consider what happened to Marcus, the software developer who had been at the same company for 4 years. He was talented, consistently outperforming his peers, and he knew intellectually that he was underpaid. When his annual review came around, he walked into his manager's office hoping to get a raise. He'd spent maybe 20 minutes thinking about what he wanted to say. His manager, on the other hand, had come prepared with a narrative. The company was navigating budget constraints. His role was being evaluated against market benchmarks. There were structural limits on compensation increases. Marcus, caught off guard, left with a 2% raise. He deserved 12. The preparation gap cost him $10,000 a year. What does pre-negotiation preparation actually look like in practice? It starts with what researchers call BAT, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is the option you walk away to if the deal falls apart. And here's something most people fundamentally misunderstand. Your BATNA is not just a backup plan. It is a source of your power. The person with the strongest alternative always negotiates from the strongest position. When Marcus walked into that meeting with no competing offers, no clarity about what he would do if they said no, he had already surrendered his leverage before saying a word. But preparation goes deeper than alternatives. It includes understanding the other parties, constraints, desires, and pressures. It means researching what's actually possible. What's the range of outcomes in this type of negotiation? What have others in similar positions achieved? What does the other party actually need from this deal? And it means rehearsing not just what you'll say, but how you'll respond to the things they're likely to say. In the modern economy, this kind of preparation takes on even greater significance. A freelancer negotiating a contract with a tech startup needs to understand not just the project scope, but the startup's funding stage, their burn rate, the competitive landscape for talent in that niche. That information doesn't just help you get a better rate, it tells you what kind of proposal will actually resonate with a founder who's watching every dollar. The most powerful thing you can do before any significant negotiation is spend 3 times as much time preparing as you expect to spend in the actual conversation. That ratio will feel uncomfortable at first. You'll be tempted to think you can wing it. You probably can't. And the cost of that overconfidence accumulates silently year after year in the form of underpayment, missed opportunities, and agreements that quietly drain your energy because they weren't structured in your favor from the start. The second secret: silence is the most underused weapon in the world. We live in a culture that is terrified of silence. The moment a conversation hits a pause, someone rushes to fill it, usually with concessions, qualifications, or nervous filler that erodes their own position. Learning to sit comfortably in silence is not a social trick. It is one of the most powerful and least practiced negotiation skills in existence. The behavioral science here is unambiguous. When you make a proposal and then stay silent, you force the other party to respond. But when you make a proposal and then immediately start talking, adding justifications, softening your ask, preemptively offering compromises, you are negotiating against yourself. You are doing the other party's work for them. There's a story that circulates among professional negotiators about a real estate investor named Helen who was buying a commercial property in the early 2000s. The seller had named a price. Helen countered with a number 40% lower, and then she said nothing. She sat at that table for what felt like several minutes, an excruciating silence that her colleagues later told her they could never have endured. The seller, uncomfortable, eventually said, "Well, I suppose we could look at the financing structure." That single sentence opened a negotiation that ultimately saved Helen's company over $200,000. The silence did more work than any argument she could have made. Why is silence so powerful? Because human beings are neurologically wired to interpret silence as disapproval, displeasure, or rejection. When you stay quiet after making a proposal, the other party's brain begins to search for ways to resolve the discomfort, and very often, that search leads them toward accommodation. They start questioning whether their position is as strong as they thought. They begin to wonder what you know that they don't. They fill the silence with movement. In the context of a job offer, this plays out with remarkable consistency. A recruiter extends an offer. Most candidates immediately say thank you and ask for time to think about it, which is fine, but it's passive. The candidates who say thank you, but I was expecting something closer to X, and then stop talking, creating a moment of genuine quiet expectation, almost always do better. Not because the recruiter is weak, but because silence signals confidence, and confidence signals that the person has options. Practice this deliberately. In your next negotiation, even a small one, make your proposal and then stop talking. Resist every impulse to fill the void. Let the weight of what you've said settle. The discomfort you feel in that silence is precisely the discomfort that creates movement. The third secret: emotion is a strategy, not a weakness. For decades, the conventional wisdom about negotiation held that the ideal negotiator is rational, calm and detached, a kind of human chess computer processing moves without feeling. This turned out to be not just wrong, but precisely backwards. Emotion, when understood and deployed strategically, is one of the most powerful forces in any negotiation. The research that dismantled the emotionless negotiator myth came largely from the work of psychologists studying what happens in high interactions. What they found was this: people don't make decisions and then justify them emotionally. They make decisions emotionally and then justify them rationally. This is not a flaw in human cognition. It is simply how human cognition works. And a negotiator who ignores this is operating with a fundamental blind spot about the very mechanism they're trying to influence. This doesn't mean throwing tantrums or manufacturing outrage. Strategic emotional engagement looks far more subtle than that. It looks like a negotiator who expresses genuine disappointment when a counteroffer falls short, not as a manipulation, but as an honest signal that communicates the boundaries of acceptable outcomes. It looks like a founder who conveys excitement about a partnership in a way that makes the other party feel like they're being invited into something valuable rather than sold something. It looks like a consultant who expresses specific concern about a clause in a contract, creating a moment of emotional specificity that tells the other party this isn't a formality, it matters. Labeling is one of the most powerful applications of emotional strategy in negotiation, and it was systematized by former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss. The technique is deceptively simple. You identify and name what the other party appears to be feeling. It seems like you're frustrated with how this process has gone. It sounds like you're concerned about the timeline. It feels like there might be something about this arrangement that doesn't quite sit right with you. What happens when you do this is neurologically fascinating. The emotional charge of that feeling diminishes almost immediately. The person feels seen and understood, which reduces their defensiveness and increases their openness. And in that open state, they are far more likely to tell you what they actually need, which is almost always more valuable information than what they originally said they wanted. The modern freelancer, the entrepreneur, pitching investors, for the manager navigating a difficult performance review, all of them are in emotional negotiations whether they acknowledge it or not. The ones who succeed are not the ones who suppress emotion from the room. They're the ones who understand the emotional landscape clearly enough to navigate it deliberately. The fourth secret: the anchor you set is more powerful than the deal. You close. There is a moment in almost every negotiation that most people let slip by without realizing its significance. The moment of the first number. Whoever names the first number has just done something profound. They have set the anchor, the psychological reference point around which all subsequent discussion will orbit. And the research on anchoring is some of the most consistently replicated in all of behavioral economics in a classic study. Participants were asked to spin a wheel that was secretly rigged to land on either 10 or 65. They were then asked to estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. The group that saw 65 gave estimates averaging 45%. The group that saw 10 gave estimates averaging 25%. The random number on a wheel, completely irrelevant to the question, shifted their answers by 20 percentage points. This is anchoring, and it happens in every negotiation, every day, with enormous consequences. When someone gives you a salary offer of $60,000 and you negotiate up to $68,000, you feel like you won, and you might have, if you had anchored first with a number of $82,000, the negotiation might have landed at $74,000. Same result, entirely different reference point. $8,000 difference per year compounded over a career. The anchor isn't just a starting point. It is the gravitational field that shapes what feels reasonable for the entire conversation. The fear that most people have about anchoring first is that they'll look aggressive or uninformed. This fear is almost entirely unfounded, and here's why: even an aggressive anchor that gets pushed back on moves the final outcome in your favor. The pushback itself is calibrated against your number. If you've done your preparation, if you know the market, if you understand the value you bring, an ambitious anchor is not a sign of ignorance. It's a sign of confidence. And confidence, as we've already established, is leverage. Starting the gig economy and the world of freelance work, anchoring takes on particular urgency. The moment a client asks, "What do you charge?" is not an invitation for you to reveal a number and hope it lands. It's an opportunity to set an anchor that shapes every negotiation that follows. The freelancer who says, "My projects in this space typically range from $15,000 to $25,000, has just created a very different conversation than the one who says, "It depends. What's your budget?" The second question hands the anchor to the client and surrenders the gravitational advantage before the negotiation begins. There is an art to setting anchors well, and it has three components. The first is specificity. A specific number like 47,000 communiques that you've done your homework, while a round number like 50,000 signals that you're guessing. The second is justification. You don't just name a number, you briefly tie it to value, to market data, to the scope of what's being offered. And the third is delivery. You name the anchor with calm confidence, not with apology or hedging, because the moment you apologize for your ask, you've already begun negotiating against yourself. The fifth secret: what people say they want is almost never what they actually need. This is perhaps the most profound insight in the entire field of negotiation, and it is the one most consistently ignored. Every negotiation has two layers: the stated position and the underlying interest. The position is what someone says they want, the interest is why they want it. And the gap between those two things is where almost all the best deals are made. A story that negotiation scholars return to often involves two sisters and an orange. Both sisters want the orange. There is only one orange. The obvious solution is to cut it in half. And that's exactly what most negotiators would do, because they're negotiating positions. But when someone finally asked each sister why she wanted the orange, a different picture emerged. One sister wanted the juice to make a smoothie. The other wanted the rind to bake a cake. There was no conflict at all. Both sisters could have the entirety of what they actually needed. The conflict was never real. It was only real at the level of positions. At the level of interests, there was a perfect solution waiting. This parable is simple, almost too simple, but the principle it illustrates operates in negotiations of extraordinary complexity. A company that says it needs a 60-day payment term isn't necessarily trying to drain your cash flow. It might be navigating an internal approval process that runs on a quarterly cycle. A client who says they need to cut your rate by 30% might not actually need to cut costs. They might need to demonstrate to their board that they negotiated effectively, in which case you could offer a different kind of concession that preserves your revenue while giving them their win. A partner who says they need more control over a project might actually need reassurance that the project will succeed. And there are a dozen ways to provide that reassurance that don't require you to surrender control. The technique for moving from positions to interests is deceptively simple but requires practice to execute well. It involves asking the question why, not accusatorily but with genuine curiosity. Help me understand what's driving that. What would it mean for you if we resolved this that way? What are you most concerned would happen if we went with a different structure? These questions do two things simultaneously. They gather the information you need to find a creative solution, and they signal to the other party that you are genuinely trying to understand them rather than simply defeat them. That shift in signal almost always softens the room. In an AI-driven economy where many traditional job functions are being automated and the nature of value is shifting rapidly, understanding interests becomes even more critical. The negotiation between a company and a contractor is no longer purely about hours and rates. It's about outcomes, risk allocation, intellectual property, scalability, and positioning. The contractor who asks, "What does success look like for you 6 months from now?" is not just being polite. They are gathering information that will allow them to structure a proposal that speaks directly to what actually matters, which will almost always be more compelling, more differentiated, and more likely to close than a proposal built around the stated position. The sixth secret: concessions are a language, and most people are illiterate. Every negotiation involves giving and getting. How you give matters enormously, perhaps as much as what you give. The pattern of your concessions sends a message that the other party is reading constantly, whether they know it or not. And most people, completely unaware of this, are sending messages that undermine their position with every move they make. Here is the core principle: the size and timing of your concessions communicates your limits. When you make large concessions quickly, you are telling the other party that you have a lot more room to move. When you make progressively smaller concessions, starting with a moderate give and then offering smaller and smaller adjustments, you are communicating that you are approaching your limit. This is not deception. It is information management, and it shapes outcomes profoundly. Consider two negotiators in a real estate deal. The seller opens at $500,000. The buyer offers $400,000. The seller comes down to $480,000. The buyer goes up to $420,000. The seller drops to $460,000. The buyer moves to $440,000. The midpoint of this negotiation is $450,000, and both parties, if they're paying attention, can feel that it's heading there. Now consider a different pattern. Same opening positions. The seller's concessions go from $500,000 to $490,000, then to $485,000, then to $483,000. The buyer's brain, responding to the shrinking gap between each concession, begins to internalize that the seller is genuinely reaching their floor. The final deal is more likely to land near $485,000 than $450,000. The concession pattern itself shifted the outcome by $35,000, with no change in either party's actual constraints. One of the most common and costly mistakes in negotiation is a unilateral concession, giving something up without receiving anything in return. This happens constantly in business contexts, where people are trying to seem collaborative or reasonable. Sure, we can extend the timeline. Of course, I'll include that in the scope. No problem, I'll take care of that. Each of these feels like generosity, and sometimes it is. But when you consistently give without receiving, you create an expectation. The other party stops seeing your concessions as gifts and starts seeing them as defaults, the baseline from which further requests will be made. The discipline of conditional concession, I can do X if you're able to do Y, transforms every give into an exchange. It doesn't have to be transactional or cold. It can be framed warmly. I'd love to find a way to work within that budget if we can do that. Would you be open to a longer initial contract? That single sentence does three things. It signals flexibility, it establishes conditionality, and it opens a creative path toward a structure that works for both parties. That is not manipulation. That is the craft of making deals that actually hold. The seventh secret: the relationship after the deal is worth more than the deal itself. This final secret is the one that separates the truly elite negotiators from the merely skilled ones, and it is the one most deeply misunderstood by people who approach negotiation as combat. Every deal you make is not just a transaction, it is the beginning of a relationship, or the continuation of one. And the way you negotiate determines the quality of that relationship in ways that echo for years. Research on post-negotiation psychology consistently shows that how people feel about the process matters as much as what they got from the outcome. A person who feels heard, respected, and fairly treated in a negotiation is more likely to follow through on their commitments, more likely to bring additional opportunities to the relationship, and more likely to speak well of you in the networks that matter. A person who feels pressured, manipulated, or steamrolled may sign the contract, but they will look for ways to recover what they feel they lost. They will be difficult in implementation. They will not go out of their way to make the deal succeed. They will not send you referrals. Over time, the cost of winning badly accumulates in ways that are hard to see in the moment but devastating in aggregate. This is particularly critical in the modern economy, where reputation travels at the speed of a LinkedIn post and networks are simultaneously more transparent and more consequential than at any previous point in history. The freelancer who squeezes every dollar out of a small client but leaves them feeling diminished is operating with a tragically short time horizon. The startup founder who outmaneuvers a potential partner on a term sheet but damages the relationship is trading long-term equity for short-term satisfaction. The principle that governs this secret is simple but requires genuine commitment. Negotiate for the deal you want while preserving the dignity of the person across from you. These two goals are not in conflict. You can be firm without being harsh. You can hold your position without dismissing theirs. You can pursue your interests while acknowledging their constraints. The negotiator who can do all of this simultaneously is operating at a level that most people never reach, and the compounded dividends in terms of trust, opportunity, and sustainable success are extraordinary. There is a concept in Japanese business culture called ma, the meaningful space between interactions, the pause that carries its own significance. Elite negotiators across cultures understand something similar. It's not just what you say in the negotiation, it's what you do after it closes, following up with genuine interest in how the other party is experiencing the agreement. addressing problems before they become disputes, acknowledging when something isn't working and proposing solutions before being asked. These behaviors are not weaknesses. They are the architecture of a reputation that opens doors. Now let's bring all 7 of these secrets together, because they are not independent strategies. They are a single integrated approach to human interaction that, once internalized, changes not just how you negotiate, but how you move through the world. Preparation is the foundation. It is a bedrock on which everything else stands. Without it, none of the other secrets can function. Silence is the space that lets your preparation breathe. It is the pause that converts groundwork into power. Emotion is the medium through which real connection occurs. It is the channel that allows understanding to flow between people who have different needs. Anchoring shapes the field of possibility. It is the act of claiming space before the conversation defines you. Understanding interests is the key to creativity. It transforms zero-sum conflicts into solvable problems. Concession discipline is a language of limits. It communicates your true position without you ever having to reveal it explicitly. And relationship stewardship is the long game. It is the compounding investment that turns individual deals into enduring advantage. Here's what I want you to sit with as we close. Right now, as you listen to this, there is probably a negotiation somewhere in your life that you have been putting off. A salary conversation you haven't had yet. A contract term you accepted without pushing back. A rate you've been charging that's below what you know the market bears. A relationship where you've been consistently giving more than you're receiving. Whatever it is, you know what it is. And the cost of that inaction, the cost of continuing to leave value on the table, is not abstract. It is measurable. It compounds. And it is entirely avoidable. The people who get what they want in this world are not smarter than you. They are not luckier than you. They are not more deserving than you. They simply understand that every interaction is a negotiation, and if you've committed to showing up to those interactions prepared, intentional, and skilled, commitment is available to you right now. Not next month. Not after you've read more books or attended a workshop or feel more ready now. Because here is the hardest truth that this book leaves you with. The cost of not negotiating is not neutral. Every day you spend without these skills, someone else is negotiating on your behalf, and their interests are not the same as yours. Your employer is negotiating against you when they set your compensation. Your clients are negotiating against you when they define your scope. Your landlord, your bank, your suppliers, they're all operating with tools and frameworks and intentionality that you may not be matching. And the gap between what you could have and what you have is filled, quietly, by exactly that asymmetry. This is not meant to alarm you. It is meant to activate you. Because the moment you internalize these 7 secrets, the moment preparation becomes instinct. Silence becomes comfortable. Emotion becomes a tool you wield rather than a force that wields you. Anchoring becomes your first move. Interests become your focus. Concessions become a language you speak fluently. And relationships become your longest investment. That is the moment everything shifts. Not because the world becomes easier, but because you become more capable of navigating it on your own terms. The art of negotiation is not a collection of tricks. It is a way of engaging with the world that respects both your own needs and the reality of the people across from you. It is the understanding that every conversation is an opportunity, not to win, but to build something better than what either party could have achieved alone. That is the promise of this craft. And it is a promise that is available to anyone willing to do the work. Go do the work.